Please welcome Susan Tan, Rants and Ruminations from a job applicant after 100 job interviews in Silicon Valley.
Hi, can you all hear me? Okay, cool. Hi, I'm Susan. So last September of 2016, I left a full-time job at Cisco to do job searching full-time. So this whole process led me to interview at over 100 tech companies in Silicon Valley. In a journey, I've seen a lot of different tech interview processes. I visited many different workplaces in Northern California. I want to share some of the most ridiculous personal stories. So to be clear, I did not set out to do 100 interviews last year. If you'd asked me how long this whole job interview process would take, that number would have been nowhere close to 100. So my life had unpredictably and strangely turned out that way. This is not my first time as a job applicant. I worked at Rotten Tomatoes, and then I worked at Piston Cloud, which is a cloud computing startup in San Francisco that got acquired by Cisco. This is a photo of an amazing past work environment, Piston Cloud Computing. This is a photo of their founding team with the early employees from the early 2010s. I love the chaotic, quirky energy of the startup, and I've learned so much working with some of the best talented, creative people that I've seen gathered in a startup environment. I learned a lot about cloud computing, distributed systems, and this is my first workplace where I got the program in Python. And so this group really likes doing photo shoots like these in fancy settings. So after having worked at an exemplary workplace, I knew what to look for and what not to look for. There are literally thousands of tech companies in the Bay Area, and it's easier to filter through potential employers with a list of no criteria. Just as a small selection from my personal no criteria. I said no to big companies because I already worked for a year and 2 months at Cisco. I always ask about the demographics, diversity numbers to company recruiters. And I'm really particularly careful about this because when I talk to the recruiter and I see that the numbers don't quite line up to what I should expect them to be, that's a red flag to me. And if I find a workplace in the Bay Area that's like very homogeneous, like I'm kind of like, yeah, like red flags are going off. So I just like working in a stereotypical tech bro work culture. I also did not want to work on stupid, silly apps. I wanted to work on real, substantial products that people use and love and have a proven history of business success. I did not want to become a co-founder or the first engineer at a new early-stage startup in the Bay Area. And by early stage, that could be anywhere from several weeks old to several months old. I also did not want to commute to offices more than 30 miles away. And eventually, I did find a great workplace that fit the criteria and avoided my list of no criteria. But the journey getting there was awful. I've done over 100 interviews in Silicon Valley, and here are 6 ways that it was the worst. So for 80% of the companies, I never heard back from them, even after the initial HR interview or the first technical phone interview. This was a common frustrating pattern in which the only response was like, oh, due to the number of candidates, we can't move forward with your application. And well, that's slightly better than no feedback. That's okay. I wasn't too disappointed. I have a pretty sunny outlook, and I always wanted to look forward and kept going with the next company, next interview. So when they don't give me a response after an interview within like a week or more, I was pretty confused, like, is this me? Is it them? Are they just too busy? Or are they silently ignoring me? Even after I found a new job, I started receiving emails from directors of engineering saying that they lost my resume somehow, and they refound my resume several months later, and they wanted to talk to me several months later. So I once did an interview with an early stage 3-person startup. They were working on some artificial intelligence product that was planning to like automate a lot of like HR, human resources processes. The co-founder and I paired together on this code exercise together in person, and I thought the code pairing exercise went pretty well, and I was looking forward to hearing the next step, so several weeks passed by, and finally I heard back from the interviewer, and he told me that he ultimately decided to hire a friend whom he had worked with before. Flat out told me he had already hired a good friend for the role. He would not have been able to hire anyone else. Sure, great. I appreciated this honesty from him, but ultimately, the founders of this new startup that I was interviewing at did not know what qualities in a candidate that they were looking for, and they ultimately ended up choosing somebody else. So another time, I completed this on-site interview with this new search engine startup called Jelly. I was scheduled to go to their second on-site interview with a CEO and co-founder. His name is Biz Stone, who you may know as one of the former co-founders of Twitter. And we're scheduled to do an in-person interview, so we're both at the same table in the same room. And throughout the entire interview process, he asked me just one question. Susan, what do you hope to accomplish in your lifetime? I did not know how to answer this question at first because I was just really thrown off. Like, this question was so random and so spontaneous. I was more prepared for questions like, oh, like, can you describe to me your favorite past programming project? Or like, what is the difference between programming in Python 2 versus Python 3? So I was not prepared for the question about the meaning of my life. So I had to come up with some reasonable sounding answer on the spot. And I gave a very generic answer, like, I want to work on the tech side of the product, make new features, create more business value. He liked my answer. I thought I did something right. But ultimately, it was a very fake, made-up question to a very fake, made-up, a fake answer to a very fake question. And neither the interviewer nor I learned very much about each other from that conversation. He could have asked me a number of more useful questions. I also did not tell him this is probably the dumbest question that anyone has asked me before. Ironically, 2 months later, the startup, Jelly, closed down. It got acquired by a larger company. And I thought how ironic that the interviewer asked me a question about the meaning of life when the business could not sustain itself for more than several months. Then there was the most awkward on-site interview I've ever done in my life. It was also the shortest interview. It was 15 minutes long. When I entered the office, the interviewer asked me to create a full-stack application in Ruby on Rails. And I didn't really know too much about Ruby on Rails. So I asked him, are you sure you want me to build this app in 15 minutes? And he said, yeah, sure, go for it. So the interviewer was in charge of this process, so I just went along with this pretty surreal interview situation. Knowing very little Ruby, I tried to make a full-stack Ruby application from scratch. He was staring over my shoulders. I was typing on the computer. I was reading through the online beginner Ruby tutorial. To be sure, this is not a pairing exercise, as I had originally expected coming in. He literally wanted me to build a Ruby on Rails application in 15 minutes. And this is my reaction the entire time. So 15 minutes later, the interviewer was seeing me struggle for creating this new URL route, adding this new feature. And he told me, okay, Susan, you don't seem to know Ruby very well, so let's just hold off on building this web application until you've learned something about Ruby. And I was like, okay. Well, I asked him, was the point of this test to see if I can pick up something really quickly in 15 minutes, or are you looking for people who already are experienced in Ruby and Ruby on Rails? He did not give me a coherent answer. I can tell that the interviewer did not know what he was looking for in a job applicant. And I couldn't be happier to be done with that interview and never have to see them again. So to this day, I still don't know what the whole point of that interview was. And when I first walked in his office, I was pretty confused. And the whole experience made me feel pretty awkward, embarrassed because I didn't know what I was getting into in the first place, and embarrassed because I thought I didn't know enough Ruby to be able to complete an arbitrary task that he gave me. And in my opinion, both reactions are pretty big red flags if an interviewer makes you feel that way, because they're supposed to be on their best behavior. So I once interviewed with a 40-person biotech startup in Redwood City, California. They have a strong mission to automate biotech labs everywhere across university labs using this newly discovered lab technique called CRISPR, which is pretty useful for doing gene editing. So I went through the whole job interview process with them. I did a 2-hour time take-home code challenge, then I did a full-day on-site interview, and that involved me giving a presentation on a past programming project. I did like a live sample project in Django, and finally I got a job offer. So briefly, I was excited because after 3 months of job searching, I got a job offer. But it turned out it was a very low salary number. In fact, it was lower than either of my previous 2 full-time jobs. This is my reaction. I explained to the CEO and co-founder of this biotech startup that the salary offer was way below the average offer for software engineers in the San Francisco Bay Area. I asked him directly for a higher number. He just refused to negotiate. He just was like, no. And so I just turned him down, no regrets. To be sure, in context, this was, to have some more information in context, this is a biotech startup with over $40 million in venture capital funding. They refuse to pay market rate for software engineers. To be sure, I should have been more clear with the recruiter that, okay, these are my salary expectations on that first initial phone call. And so I think it's good to be truthful about those expectations, and rather than be horribly surprised at the end. So folks who are starting their first software jobs may be excited about getting their first job offer, and they take the first number offered to them, and that's not always the best choice. So if co-founders think they can get away with hiring engineers at a below market rate, it's really up to you. Do your research, push back. So very much I was really careful about where the next workplace would be. I was looking out for any red flags about, so if a company expected all their employees to be on call 24/7, or expected people to respond to emails on the weekends, I was very cautious and wary about those companies. So it's easy for recruiters to press a button and send out a code challenge to hundreds of applicants at once. And I know a lot of tech companies make this a requirement in the application process, in addition to their tech interview process, to screen applicants based on coding ability. And I want to save the worst rant for last. The worst thing about the job interview process, in my opinion, is the take-home code challenge. And if you've never done a take-home code challenge, here's what to expect. You may be given a 30-minute, 90-minute timed take-home exam. And sometimes they may be an open-ended assignment too, like build a web application of your choice using the Twitter API with both a front-end and a back-end component. And that's a real example of a code exam that I was given. I want to talk about specific ways that open-ended take-home exams are the worst. So the example that I gave you about build a web app of your choice with the Twitter API is one example of a bad code challenge. The assignment has no feature or time constraints. You can take an hour to do this problem. You can take a whole weekend to work on this open-ended problem. Without any bounded constraints, it's hard for me to figure out what the interviewer is evaluating for or how I should best prepare for the take-home code challenge. So I once got feedback from a recruiter who said that I did not pass the code challenge because I did not include unit tests. And yet nowhere in the instructions did it say to include unit tests. I also got feedback from the recruiter that I should have used this library instead of this one that I used in the assignment. And I was like, well, I'm not sure what they were expecting. It's also pretty rare for me to get feedback after I've completed a take-home challenge due to the number of applicants. And if I did get feedback, it would be a pretty impersonal reply. So I once did a code challenge. It took 8 to 10 hours, and several weeks passed by. I never heard back from the recruiter, just no response. So that's 8 to 10 hours I've lost working on an arbitrary test to prove my skills to a potential employer. And if I were interviewing at, say, 3 to 4 positions, and each position requires an open-ended code challenge that can take anywhere from 6 to 8 hours, we're looking at 18 to 32 hours of unpaid labor, where I may not be able to get any feedback after I've completed the assignment, and if I do, it's an impersonal automated reply. If I gave up my weekend to work on a code challenge, I didn't have an opportunity to apply to more jobs or to recharge for the next week of interviews. So doing a take-home challenge was not a good return of investment for me. Some code challenges require you to code in an unfamiliar language. I received the coding test to create a web application in Java after I told a recruiter that I'm not interested in working in Java. Now, there's value in having algorithms type questions for, say, like a new college graduate looking for their first job, but asking those questions doesn't really make sense for mid-level to senior level programmers. And a lot of the timed exams that I got were like really algorithms heavy, like they were copying and pasting questions from a university level algorithms book. I remember one of the questions asked me to implement a tree traversal algorithm, like a breadth first search from scratch. And I'm just like looking at this question like, okay, well, as a web software engineer building like web-related features, I would rarely have to implement a breadth first search in real life. And it was like sitting through some college final exam, and college was years and years ago. So there was a mismatch between what the code challenge asked for and what the job description said. Several times, recruiters have sent me a timed code challenge right after I submitted a job application online. They wanted me to invest time in solving a coding puzzle, even when I haven't talked to a real human being and I didn't know what projects or products they were making or what the team culture is like. This is a screenshot of like a real sample busy interview week, in which I did like 20 phone call interviews, including recruiter screens and code pairing interviews. 3 of those resulted in coding challenges. I did like 3 on-sites towards the end of the week. A lot of these companies fell into the no criteria when I asked them more specific questions about the products or the workplace culture. Most of them fell into the no criteria. When I walked into the office, I saw some yellow red flags in the workplace environment. The job search process is intense and demanding. It is in itself a full-time job. And do you see a time slot where I can do a 60-hour code exam during the weekday? Living in San Francisco, one of the most expensive cities in America, is a reason why I had to keep busy with interviews. My goal was to aim for the highest throughput in any given week, and I took small breaks in between to keep on my energy for a week like this. So I did a number of timed open-ended take-home exams. I got either no feedback or I got an automated impersonal reply, and I got really frustrated, and I felt tired at the end of every week from talking to so many people and doing a lot of take-home exams. So ultimately, this is my solution. I decided to set some boundaries. I added code challenges to my no criteria. And I had to be careful about my time and use it wisely. And I didn't want to get too tired and burned out by the end of the week. All right, so going through the same process with many employers is tiresome. Uploading my resume in a job application online that looks exactly the same as everyone else's is tiresome. Answering the same questions from a group of recruiters, like what am I looking for in my next role, what is the ideal culture fit, is also pretty tiresome. At this point, I memorize a lot of the same answers to many of the same questions that I would get multiple times in the same week. Job searching is terrible. Finding my first job took 2 months. Finding my second job took 6 weeks. And this recent job search from last year took about 4 or 5 months. It doesn't matter what level of experience you're at. You could be a junior engineer, mid-level, senior engineer. The job searching process is still pretty terrible, and it's unpredictable in terms of how long you'll take, what questions you get asked. A lot of interviewers don't really know what they're looking for, or they ask questions that aren't quite relevant to the job position itself. Or they're just copying an interview process from another company. So as a job applicant, finding the right culture fit is also really difficult. There's no easy solution. So my job searching experience was almost always terrible, with few rare shining exceptions. And my end goal was to filter out the companies that fell into the no criteria pretty quickly, and then try to find those rare, shining, positive examples, the places where I do want to work at. I did find some rare, shining examples. There was one company in San Francisco that sent me an outline of what to expect in each stage of the interview process and what they're evaluating for, as well as the names of the engineers and product managers I would talk to during the on-site interview. So they gave me like a little handbook to prepare for this on-site, and I really appreciated that. At the end, it's not you, it's them. It's easy to think that this experience is terrible because you're not smart enough, you don't know enough Python or Ruby to complete the interview process. And it's easy to lose your self-confidence after going from one bad experience after another. But really, I think the whole impersonal process is to blame. It's the factory system at fault. Job applicants are moving through the system that they have little control over. Employers almost never get feedback on what works or what doesn't work from the applicants that they've talked to. And I know I've complained about many, many things for the past half hour. The one thing I don't want to go into is to tell employers what they should or should not do in their own interview processes. I don't want to be prescriptive. An interview process that works for one employer may not necessarily work for another employer. And I don't think there's a perfect interview process that can work for all applicants and employers everywhere. So every new morning was like a clean, blank slate. I can talk to new recruiters, I can talk to new engineers, learn more about new products that are being made, and ask questions about the team culture. And software is changing every industry on the planet. As developers, it's wonderful that we get to build products that people use and love. It's important to me that I pick a workplace where I could work on cool products every day. And each morning was a new way for me to get me to that goal. So the dog working on cool products built with Python was like the big, motivating, shining spot in this whole awful process. Thank you for listening to my rants. I'm happy to take questions.
If you want to ask questions, please come up to the microphones, and please be sure that they're actually questions.
Hi. Thank you very much. That was very interesting. I have one question that came to my mind was, since you were specifically looking away from larger established companies, do you imagine your experience would be the same with them in the sense that they probably have a lot more experience interviewing, some bad, some good, but it would probably be different than focusing on small companies? Do you have thoughts on that?
Do I have opinions on what the interview processes would be like at large companies versus
compared to your experience, since it sounded like you had been focusing on smaller companies and not considering larger companies? I'm just wondering if you thought about any of that.
Since I was moving pretty quickly, I found that the larger companies weren't moving as quickly in my experience. So I wanted to get my foot in the door. Whereas like a lot of companies, in my experience, tend to, there's a lot of lag time in between each step of the interview process. So that was my reasoning for avoiding the larger companies.
Hi. I come at this not actually from a Python coding angle. I am in people ops, so this is really, really productive to hear this. I would love to hear what you would want people like me or HR or recruiters or even hiring managers, what we should do to better tune our process. There is a big push in our industry to make the whole employee experience that we really try to tune culture and make it really fun and sexy and everything, but to include the job application process within that. So that's something we're really trying to do, and we could use all the help we can get, so.
I think that on the other side of the table, as an employer, I feel like the interview process is about having I think that the interview process for employers is about like, leaving a good impression, making sure that it's a really good experience for everybody. To repeat the question, like what are some suggestions about like that I can make for recruiters and people on the other side of the table? And so in my opinion, I think that like having, like getting feedback is pretty important. Like I know some companies send out surveys about like how, like, what do you think of the whole process, anonymous surveys. And I feel like the entire process should be considered from like start to end, that like it should be a good experience for everybody. It should be a good customer service. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. I really liked your talk. I thought it was great. I'm a brand new hiring manager, and so I was going to ask that question, but I won't now. Is there, you ragged on code challenges a lot, and I get the open-ended thing. Is there, what would you consider an acceptable code challenge, I guess?
I feel like I've had very few rare, shining, like, positive examples of code challenges, and I feel like a really good code challenge should have like some amount of feedback. Like I feel like I've seen a lot of these like automated email replies that, like I've spent all this time working on a code challenge and I get this like either no reply or some automated impersonal reply. Like I feel like having some like feedback, hey, maybe like I could have improved on points A, B, and C, and this is, there's like room for improvement. Like having that personal touch could really be useful.
So for the hiring people to treat it like a code review?
So, can you repeat that?
For the hiring people to treat it like a code review, almost?
I feel like having a code review tells a lot about, like the way that people code review each other's code can tell you a lot about the team's culture in and of itself. So there are some, like I think 1 or 2 companies that actually gave me feedback from a code challenge was like they gave me really specific things where I could have improved. And so that was really useful to me, so I can like do better on it next time.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Hi. I also come out with after a really long and frustrated interview process. So I want to form a question in form of open discussion. So I interview in Bay Area, Los Angeles, and Seattle. So in your thought, do you think that the interview situation in Bay Area is significantly worse than other area? And what's your thought on what the reason might be?
It may be that I'm one candidate out of many hundreds of candidates in the Bay Area, so it's really hard for me to tell. And I've only interviewed in the Bay Area, so it's hard for me to tell like what it's like to interview at other cities around the world.
What are your thoughts on what the? Do you feel like if we make an assumption that if it's worse than another area, do you think what's the reason might be for it to be so frustrated or worse?
I'm not sure because it's hard for me to tell.
That's
I have
fine.
like only one point of comparison, which is the Bay Area.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
You're a really talented, obviously, person, and you obviously know what you're about. And I'm just going to ask you kind of this, almost a drawing out question here. Would you consider using your skills to actually dramatize this? I mean, you are 2017's answer to the bastard operator from hell. Do you understand? and the process that you're going through with these, I mean, I'm sorry to speak poorly, but of these people totally disconnected from the process who call themselves HR, okay? I mean, and they're just one target of opportunity. There are plenty more. There's the clueless manager. There's so many wonderful artistic characters that you could, and do it in Python. I don't know. Thank you. That's my question. Would you consider that?
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your experience. One question. Have you found any techniques as a candidate that's worked for you to make up for bad processes? I imagine most of the hiring managers that need to see your talk aren't in this room. And so for people that are going to go out and get jobs, presumably most of us at some point, how can you counter that from the perspective of a candidate?
So your question is what advice would I give to a candidate?
So you show up in the room and you realize, this person is not going to ask me the right questions. They're not going to they're not going to have measured me properly. Sometimes it's pretty easy to tell. Have you found any techniques as a candidate that works to make up for that?
I think if you're stuck in a bad situation that you know, okay, this interview is not going to work out, and you know that in like the first several minutes, I feel like being polite, being respectful is always like something to keep in mind. Being civil is really important, and there are times when I get like pretty frustrated, but I try to make a good impression on everybody around me. Yeah.
Sorry, that's all we have time for. Please thank Susan again.
Thank you. There are literally thousands of tech companies in the Bay Area, and it's easier to filter through potential employers with a list of no criteria. Just as a small selection from my personal no criteria. I said no to big companies because I already worked for a year and 2 months at Cisco. I always ask about the demographics, diversity numbers to company recruiters. And I'm really particularly careful about this because when I talk to the recruiter and I see that the numbers don't quite line up to what I should expect them to be, that's a red flag to me. And if I find a workplace in the Bay Area that's like very homogeneous, like I'm kind of like, yeah, like red flags are going off. So I just like working in a stereotypical tech bro work culture.
Please welcome Susan Tan, Rants and Ruminations from a job applicant after 100 job interviews in Silicon Valley.
Hi, can you all hear me? Okay, cool. Hi, I'm Susan. So last September of 2016, I left a full-time job at Cisco to do job searching full-time. So San Francisco, that got acquired by Cisco. This is a photo of an amazing past work environment, Piston Cloud Computing. This is a photo of their founding team with the early employees from the early 2010s. I love the chaotic, quirky energy of the startup, and I've learned so much working with some of the best talented, creative people that I've seen gathered in a startup environment. I learned a lot about cloud computing, distributed systems, and this is my first workplace where I got the program in Python. And so this group really likes doing photo shoots like these in fancy settings. So after having worked at an exemplary workplace, I knew what to look for and what not to look for. This whole process led me to interview at over 100 tech companies in Silicon Valley. In the journey, I've seen a lot of different tech interview processes. I visited many different workplaces in Northern California. I want to share some of the most ridiculous personal stories. All right. So to be clear, I did not set out to do 100 interviews last year. If you'd asked me how long this whole job interview process would take, that number would have been nowhere close to 100. So my life had unpredictably and strangely turned out that way. This is not my first time as a job applicant. I worked at Rotten Tomatoes, and then I worked at Piston Cloud, which is a cloud computing startup culture. I also did not want to work on stupid, silly apps. I wanted to work on real, substantial products that people use and love and have a proven history of business success. I did not want to become a co-founder or the first engineer at a new early-stage startup in the Bay Area. And by early stage, that could be anywhere from several weeks old to several months old. I also did not want to commute to offices more than 30 miles away. And eventually, I did find a great workplace that fit the criteria and avoided my list of no criteria. But the journey getting there was awful. I've done over 100 interviews in Silicon Valley, and here's 6 ways that it was the worst. So for 80% of the companies, I never heard back from them,